What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Craftsman podcast.
Hey, how are you? Happy Monday.
Happy Monday
It's
or Sunday
it's
night.
a lovely Monday.
It is a lovely Monday.
How was your weekend?
My weekend was good.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's Tuesday. I feel like I've already forgotten about the weekend. I'm already
What
on
did
to
I
like
do?
looking
Yeah.
for next weekend.
Oh, we went away for a wedding, and that was actually super nice because Meg and I have not been able to really travel just ourselves. We didn't actually really travel very far. We dropped the kids off at their grandparents and drove another 45 minutes to a wedding. So one of her cousins were getting married, but it was nice. We went out to dinner the night before, had the wedding the next day,
Some good dancing
and
in?
oh, I got some good dancing in, man. Every time
Your
I go,
legs still sore?
my legs are not sore,
Man,
not from
you didn't get
dancing.
low enough.
I don't think I did. Yeah, I didn't. I'm recalling the night, um, but they didn't have a ton of, like, really dance music.
Dude, the last wedding we were at was the same thing. The DJ sucked. We were
Like, it
like,
it it wasn't a DJ, it was a live band, and they were great, they just didn't play a lot of dance
yeah, I was
music.
like, put on some Missy or something for me, you
Right?
know?
You know? Pop that. But it was like, all of a sudden, they started playing Dropkick Murphys.
Yeah,
Shipping up to Boston, and dude, it legit turned into a mosh pit.
that's funny.
Every dude in the wedding was up there screaming as loud as they could the whole song and literally jumping on top of each other. The the groom ended up in a chair like they do at
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A bar
like
or,
like a Jewish wedding or
yeah,
whatever, and they're very much Irish, but it was like one of the last songs, so, like, the energy was just so high,
yeah.
and then it was like, "Alright, we're doing one more song," and we're like, "What?"
When a
But,
live band is good at a wedding, it's good.
yeah. Yeah, we that was one of the things that Meg and I agreed on is that we had to have a band,
Yeah.
and we had so many, like, first choices, and they were all booked, and we end up with an amazing band that they did a great job, um, but yeah, we're not here to talk about weddings. What are we here to talk about?
But we are starting a wedding podcast.
We are.
Nick's starting a wedding company next week.
Yeah. Well, we'll rent tents. We have a bunch of dresses we can rent.
Rent the
Rent
runway.
I was just gonna say rent the runway. Oh, why do we both know what that is?
We talk about, paint finish issues that I was running into.
Well, I think it's more about education in the trades and our thought around
Yeah,
education.
initially we were talking about education. I think that kind of led into why I don't disclose certain things, and then what kind of
And
got
product.
yeah, and product, and what kind of led me into that with what I was experiencing the past couple days on the job, and then we talked about kids a little bit.
We talk about kids. I do wanna, like, we talk about product and how product is driven by marketing, and and everyone is out looking for the easiest way to do something, and how it's not always going to be the product that solves the issue. And I think that we are, you know we we talk about that in depth,
Yeah,
and you kind of uncover, like, what the issue is with assuming that a particular product will solve the issue.
yeah, that the product is just part of the system.
Hmm.
And you have to sort out what systems work for you so that, if you run into an issue, you can kind of pinpoint that issue. And if you don't have experience with that product, it makes it a lot more difficult to figure out where you went wrong because you don't have your systems dialed.
Yeah, and let's open up the Instagram DMs again for I'd love for you guys to kind of let us know what you think about education in the trades, and we're going to talk about it here and kind of relate it back to how someone can go from an apprentice to a journeyman to a lead carpenter. I think Canada has the red seal. The US doesn't have a lot of formality behind that unless you're talking about union. but I'd love to, open up the DMs to see what you guys think would be a better approach to educating, fellow tradespeople.
Yeah, and if you think that that is something that could work on a larger scale, or that that should be kind of s company specific.
Yeah, let's get into it. Let's get This podcast is brought to you by Duration Molding and Millwork, durationmillwork.com. So we talk about it every podcast, but it's the next generation of exterior millwork. Indistinguishable from wood when painted, will not rot or decay, easy to work with in sand, minimal head fasteners, etc., etc. Stock profiles, beveled siding, custom profiles, all made from duration. I said duration, but I meant to say Boral True Exterior.
Yeah. And if you haven't seen it, I'm sure if you reach out to them, I know at the show they had some samples of their product. Um, they even had a sample in a jar of water to show basically
Yeah, I know.
how it holds up. But I'm sure that you get samples, of Boral, Truex, and potentially even directly from Duration to kind of see what they can do.
Yeah, and one product that I didn't mention is they also have the cedar shake line, where it's essentially they're manufacturing a replication cedar siding, um, which unlike a lot of the competitors, it's still a beveled product, so you're not getting that over build up.
Yeah, cool. Hope you guys enjoy it. I I was listening to a podcast the other day, um, and they were talking about, it was a professor at Stanford, and he was talking about how all of his tests are take home. Um, and his reason for it was, there's rarely a time in the real world where you're gonna be given a problem and then say, you have to sit down, you can't use anything to figure out this problem. You just have to like know how to do it, and you're timed. He's like, typically, any problem that somebody comes to you in the real world, you get as much time as you need and you can take that home with you. And he's like, so all my tests are take home because I feel like that's indicative of what life is really like.
Totally. I think, it's the same with this. It's like we have a month to complete the test. And, he's like, it has to be your own work, but they encourage working together as a group through some of like the problems because that's how, like you said, it's the real world. I've seen this meme kick around the internet too, where it's like being, I remember being back in school and it's like, why can't we use a calculator? It's like, well, because you're never gonna be carrying a calculator around in your pocket. And it's
Yeah.
like, actually,
I have a computer in my
I have a
pocket right
computer in
now.
my pocket that I can Google the answer. I don't even need the calculator app. But yeah, I agree with that, man. It's just, you know, I don't know. I've never been a good test taker, and I've always been fine. I've never really failed out of anything. Um, that's a lie. I failed out of physics actually my first year, but I was great at all the real world applications and all the lab. But then it was like, all right, now do the book work, and it's like I have no idea of what I just did.
Yeah. I was always a good test taker, which cut myself so much slack because I didn't really have to pay attention
Yeah, and
for
also,
all of class leading up to the
yeah,
test, and then I would just, like, look at what I needed to either morning of or the night before, and then go in, take the test, do well, and then it would all be gone until, midterm or final where I had to know it again.
yeah. I was definitely a procrastinator. I wasn't like you someone that rushed home on that day one to get something done. I typically work better under pressure, but every time I do, I'm like, I wish I had more, took more time. I feel the same way about Christmas shopping. Like I'm like, you know what? I'm getting it done in October this year, and then it's like Thanksgiving comes around. It's like, man, I really got to figure out what I'm doing for Christmas.
But I'm pretty sure even if you shopped in October, it would be the same thing. You would just bang out all the Christmas shopping in a very short amount of time. It's just a few
Totally.
months earlier.
But I think that, like, my stress level would be lower.
Yeah, maybe.
Probably not.
Oh. I feel like it's just the same thing. It's just a couple months earlier. Like,
Mm.
if somebody gave me, I feel like that's the entire thing about procrastination. Where, if somebody gave me 6 weeks or 4 weeks to do something, it's already 3.5 to 5.5 weeks more than I really need. It's just when I'm gonna start that is getting bumped by a week and a half.
Yeah,
That was just kind of my I don't know. I It's so different now because everything that we do, it's just bits and pieces, and you have to be ahead of it, and you have to, get your permits done and your paperwork done and your materials ordered, and you can't just wait until the last minute and try and cram. It's the opposite of what we do now, but it doesn't bother me doing this. But in school, it used to drive me nuts. I hated doing everything early. Come home and do your homework, and you know take it a little bit of time. It's like, no, I don't want to take an hour each day. I just want to take 8 hours, you know, for 6 months of the school year and just prep for it and then be done with it and have every other day free to not have to do homework.
right. Yeah, I don't know. It was always so interesting how looking back on it now, I think more is that how everyone's forced to learn the same way, and that's a big reason why I end up going to trade school, like vocational high school, because I was like, at least I can go there and do what I love 2 weeks, you know, at a time, because we did 2 weeks shop, 2 weeks class, and I talked to other schools, and they're like, oh, we do mornings in class and afternoons in shop, and I'm like, that would suck.
See,
Like, you how do you I just I don't know, I'm like, my entire day would be filled with shop, and, like, I would be on it all day. I couldn't imagine doing something that I wasn't good at in the morning and then doing it, what I loved in the afternoon.
yeah, I also, I mean, what you had said about everyone kind of having to learn the same way, I do get that, but at the same time, I think that that's kind of the issue there, that
Totally.
you're not like, you're being taught the same way, but you're not necessarily learning the same way, and I think that's where people get hung up because certain people learn visually, certain people learn, by working through the problems themselves, certain people learn by, just listening. So I think that all teachers have a certain curriculum, a way and a style that they teach, and then you're just expected to learn whatever way works best for you, which I think college, yeah, that makes sense. You're mature enough to kind of sort that out and manage your time. But you look at elementary school, middle school, where there's so much going on and you're developing and everything else. And to be like, well, I'm going to take my own initiative to learn this the way that my teacher is not necessarily teaching. And it's like, no wonder why so many kids struggle.
Hmm. I'm actually, visiting the North Bennett Street School, the carpentry school in Boston tomorrow, and I've been to the school once when we did I think we do a podcast there? With
I
Brent
don't
Hull.
think. Oh yeah, I wasn't there.
Yeah, we did a podcast there, but I haven't been there when the school's in session, and, I've been chatting with them just, like, understanding how can we be a resource for them and them be a resource for us, and it's like, teaching and learning is something that, you know, I think that the industry we talk about all the time, like, the industry doesn't do a lot of teaching. It's like you're brought in as an apprentice because you don't know anything, and then you just learn by you know
Shadowing.
yeah, shadowing, and if it maybe you learn something, and, you don't always learn because the person you're shadowing might not be a good teacher. So I'm curious to see how their what their process looks like, and, in hopes that, something I've been kinda talking to them on the side is, you know, how could we build a program that offered these these opportunities for, like, just specifically my carpenters to go there, once a week, every Wednesday night from 5 to 8 o'clock, go there and take this carpentry class. And my thought is that if we set it up correctly, it would allow people to formally advance their career, where it's like you come in as an apprentice, you're going to go to school for the next 6 months, 1 day a week, and you're going to learn the basics of framing, and then it's now you're a journeyman. It's like, all right, you want to be a lead, you're going to go back to school, for 6 months, and you're going to learn XYZ. And I think that if we can implement a formal training like that, then we can have this formal ranking process within companies, because one of the things I struggled with in the past is that I've hired guys that have been at a certain rank at one company and they come here and they're great, but they're not what I would consider the same rank. And it's like, what was that based on? And it's like,
Yeah,
it's not
there's no
based on anything.
standard.
Right? It's
It
just like that's what they call them.
and it's all individual and it's company to company, and there's no, I mean, I guess the union does a better job of doing that and structuring that,
And
and
that's
I
kinda where I was going with it, is like like, the fact that I remember when I was in high-rise construction, like, that's what the union the all the kids, "Oh, I gotta leave at 3 today because I got class." And it wasn't like they wanted to go to class. It's like, "No, no, if you wanna work here, you're going to class,
yeah.
and you're going to advance, and you're going to learn, and it's a requirement." And I think that we should be doing the same thing. We should and being able to offer it. And, of course, selfishly, I'm looking at it for my guy, excuse me, my guys, but you set that program up correctly, and next thing you know, it's like every builder in Boston's going to want their staff to be going to school and learning. Because, you know, for me, going back to the shadowing thing, right? You're only learning what you're working on, and you might only work on interior trim projects and then randomly have to, like, for you, right? Then randomly have to go, frame up a bastard hip roof. And it's like, you don't you were learning in the process. And if someone was working alongside you and always doing interior trim and then they go do that job, it's like, where do I even start?
Yeah, and it's also that, when if somebody's on the job, they have an agenda there, and
Right.
it's to produce, or it's timeline, it's quality, and you're running into issues, and it's real world. You're not in a classroom, so it's difficult to stop and take the time and answer all the questions and get into everything when at that point your job isn't necessarily teaching. Yeah, you're trying to teach by showing an example of what you're going through, but your your job is doing the work at that point. So I think that that becomes difficult if there were a way to kind of get yourself outside of that, and it's like, hey, we don't necessarily need to produce today, we need to teach. I think that that allows you, and kind of affords you the time and the effort that you can put into the younger men and women who are looking to try and learn the trades. It's it's a very it's a tough, it's kind of a tough situation to be in because it costs money to do that. And then, just like traditional schooling where it becomes a business and people are looking to make money off of it. And it's kind of hard, how to structure that. And then, like you said, there's so many small companies, where people do things differently, that that's why it's like school doesn't make that much sense to me, because you're just teaching people shit that they're not really going to use. So
Right.
like, even you dig into that, it almost is better, like, for you to just have that for your company and
Mhm.
not be like this big massive program, because everyone does things differently and you end up learning when you get to that company. So it's almost like, when my wife's work, brings somebody new in, they onboard them and they train them. And it's almost like, hey, we're going to invest this much money into this person in hopes that they work out, which I think it's actually better to look at that from within your own company and what works for you guys.
Yeah, and it's, after that tour, it's like something that we talked about internally here is like, obviously Ken's doing, the MT Copeland thing, you're doing that. And, I think we could talk about that too. But, what if we were to do this in-house where it's like, all right, you know what? Instead of trying to get it in an actual school, like what if we did one day a month where, hey, if we're gonna pay someone to come in to teach us how to frame a hip roof, and we get all the material delivered, and then we have, like, whatever, we buy pizza and dinner, and then it's like from 5 to 9 tonight you can come to the shop and we're going to run through how to frame a hip roof from the very beginning, and offer this on a monthly basis. And it's something that I think it would be enormously valuable. And yeah, there's a cost to it. And if it's a formal training program through a school, maybe the costs are higher. But we could even start just with something in house. And it's the same thing for cabinetry. It's like, hey, like, I know you've been working as a cabinet maker, but tonight we're gonna do a a course on veneering and
Yeah.
how and I don't know, part of me thinks like this could be something that we could offer to anyone where it's like, "Hey, we got 10 spots open. We're gonna walk through veneering. If you're interested, sign up today."
Yeah, that's smart, and I think it has to, it almost has to be kind of walking through specifics where I think the goal with traditional schooling is to cover the basics and cover everything and have, we're not going to dig into anything too much. We're going to touch on everything, and you're going to have this comprehensive knowledge of all things, and then you come out of it and you're like, well, actually, I know nothing. Like I know a little bit about everything, and at the end of the day, I don't know anything. I have to, like, wherever I am put at this point, wherever I end up, I now need to relearn or figure out what's going on. And I think, offering trade specific tasks would be far more valuable where it's a like a palatable amount. It's not too much. It's not so overwhelming, but you can take a half a day, take a day and go and learn this skill. And I think even after work is a good thing too, because after work, it's like, yeah, I'm signing up for this. This is my own money. I'm going to make the most of it. If you're like at work getting paid for it, it's the same thing as when I was in school. I'm like, I'm just here for the free pizza, and that's about it, you know?
Right. And I think, that's where, that's where if there's a financial gain to it where it's like you can't just be obviously be there for the free pizza, but someone's going to be paying for it. And if it's like, there's thoughts of like if we build this, we offer it to our team pro bono, but we also make it a requirement where it's like if you want to advance your career, you are required to complete this course. We will pay
Yeah.
for it, but you are required to complete the course. And maybe there's a test at the end where it's like, all right, now you frame a hip roof. I'm using the hip roof as an example. um and alternatively, it's like, all right, well, what if someone wants to pay to take the course like they do at North Bennett Street? It's like those people are going there because they want. I know I don't know as much about that course, but I would assume that most people that are going there are probably because they want to learn that trade and be in that career. I'm sure there's people that go there that don't, but I can only imagine it being such a specialty school that that is something that most people are seeking out that training.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that I ended up doing that stuff with MT Copeland. They're not pushing product. I believe they're specifically not looking to sponsor things and crossing out labels and, they s- I think it's similar to working with fine home building and stuff like that where if there's a product that you use where it's like, hey, you have to use this, there's like this is what I use to get my results, that's one thing, but just
Mhm.
to pitch something for the sake of pitching it,
Right.
um they weren't looking to do that. So that was attractive for me because it's like, hey, we want to learn what you do. And it doesn't have to be like what tool exactly or what brand you use. And that's something that I know people get super butthurt and I get a lot of heat for on Instagram where it's like, what paint do you use? What primer do you use? What tip do you use? And I've I've just gotten to the point where I typically just don't answer people. And it's not to be rude. I just I feel as though I'm not really helping them just by giving them that
Mm.
information.
Well, I think
Um,
that I mean, I don't think is your course up yet with MT?
no, not yet.
When it is, all you have to do is send the link now. It's
Yeah,
like,
but
"Here you
like,
go."
but even like the whole, even getting into that, it's not necessarily the paint that I use.
Right.
There's a dozen different paints that you can use, a dozen different primers that you can use, and you can get really good results. You can do the same thing that I'm doing, but it's like all of those tips and paints and all of that's interchangeable, and that's not the knowledge. To me, that's like somebody's looking to take a shortcut. Um,
Yeah, and this is something I actually talked about on, my NS podcast because someone reached out and asked why we weren't using zip on a house and we switched to CDX. And listen, I and I'm gonna say it here as well, like we have a great relationship with Huber. I use a ton of their products. I like Zip for what it is. We just have chose to choose a different path because we feel as though we can control a better result. But and I'm picking on Zip here where it's like people look at that as a product like, "Oh, I can achieve airtight if I use Zip."
Yeah.
Or I can achieve a perfect weather resistant barrier if I use Zip. And it's like, no, like it's not the product.
Yeah.
It
Exactly.
and it's the same thing when it's like, don't use Zip because it fails. The nails are gonna let moisture in and it's gonna blow up like a sieve because it's press board. It's like, no, it's
Yeah.
not because it's Zip. It's again the installation, the person that's installing it, and the products that make it easier, like Zip, like they claim that it's less labor to install and it's easier to install, easier to achieve. I, I don't disagree with that, but my fear is that when it's promoted that way, is that people look at it as here's my opportunity to skip a bunch of steps but still achieve a great result.
Yeah.
And it's the same way I feel about spray foam, where it's like, yeah, you can get R 6.9 per inch with spray foam, but that doesn't mean you're getting R 6.9 or that you're getting a quality job. There's still the installer that has to chemically mix this stuff exactly correct in order to achieve the ultimate result. And it's like, like you said, people asking you for what paint it is. I'm guilty of that. Thomas May Bespoke, he paints all his stuff with Sailor. And like I see his stuff up close constantly. I'm like, what are you using to paint that, man? He's like, I use Sailor. And I'm like, we got to use Sailor. But it's like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
That's not. Like I'm just as guilty as asking, but it's not that. It's as you allude to constantly. It's the prep. It's everything goes up to spraying that coat.
Yeah, and I don't feel as though maybe it helps a little, but like maybe that last like 2.5% that you're chasing, yeah, product may matter, but I'm not here to sell a specific type of finish. Just like you're not here to sell Zip. Like those companies are going to pitch their product because that's the business they're in. I'm not in the business to sell tools. My Instagram is not, intended to sell tools and it's not intended to sell product. It's intended to sell my work and my value. And I don't think that I bring value to anybody who follows me by just being like, "Yo, this is the tip that I use. This is, the paint that I use and this is I thin it," because they're going to go in and they're going to shoot it and, it's not going to be the same. Maybe it is, but like chances are you didn't go through all the appropriate steps. You didn't learn all of that in a way where it's like, well, first I need to do this and then I
Mhm.
need to do that. And there's like a very specific process for going through that. And if you skip any of those steps, you can end up banging your head against the wall and you can ruin a lot of stuff. So I don't think that I'm helping anyone out. If there's somebody who's like, listen, I'm doing everything this way. I'm doing this, and this. And like, I don't think that my primer sands very well. And I really want that to be a good base coat. And it's like, yeah, well, then try these primers. But
Right.
like, for me to just be like, use this primer, that's not the answer to it.
Mm.
It's hand sanding, it's easing your edges, it's making sure that your substrate's suitable for that. It's conditioning your cabinets before you bring them in. It's priming prior to caulk in case things shrink. There's just so many things that go into it that to me, that's like, hey, you know what? All we see is you get a really good finish. Tell us what paint you use and we'll be able to do that. And like
Mhm.
you definitely can do what I'm doing. It's not difficult. It's just labor intensive. And if you're not willing to put the labor into it, it doesn't matter what finish or tip I tell you. You're not going to get those results. And people get bent out of shape about that. Um, and people get hung up and try and like go off on me about it, and I've kind of stuck to my guns and dug my heels, and it's just something that I'm not going to do. I use a ton of different paints, a ton of different primers, and it's all specific. It's specific to job, it's specific to timeline, cure times, budget, and it's not just, hey, every single time I paint and I use this, but then I've also developed different systems for using all of those finishes that kind of work, and you can't necessarily substitute one for the other. Um, and if you do, you have to know how to then transition to the next. And I just I don't think that that's the answer for me. Just like you said with Zip, you're not in the business to sell a product like that. You're not a vendor, distributor. So it just doesn't make sense to be like, hey, use Zip for the sake of using Zip because it's so easy and it never fails.
Right. But and that goes with every product.
Exactly.
Like, I think it's the most frustrating thing, and, like, listen, we've both promoted products and used products and stand behind them and have worked with a bunch of these brands, but ultimately, the message is lost when it's not related back to install.
Yeah.
And, one of the things in this passive house course, we were talking, like, everyone was like, what should I be using for my WRB?" It's like, "What do you mean?" Like, "Whatever you want." It's like, "Well,
Yeah.
what's the best one?" It's like, "For what?"
For what? Yeah.
Yeah, like, there's so many factors into that. It's like and, one of the guys was like, We've seen passive homes built with Tyvek." It's like in Tyvek, it the best product? No, but when it's installed correctly, it can do its job.
Yeah.
And that's what, the from a product standpoint, everyone's looking to figure out like, all right, what does my product do that someone else's doesn't? Does it get installed faster? Is it easier? Like,
I mean,
and
that's how they sell product.
right. It's all there's always a benefit to, different using different types of products. No doubt. And ultimately it just comes down to what product are you most comfortable with? And are you going to take the time necessary to install it correctly? And I think going back to like when people reach out to you, yeah, you're probably not going to get back to them when they're trying to just like skip steps and get to, the end result. But I do think that, in general, like that's the benefit of the technology we have today is that we do have the opportunity to figure out the best approach with whatever product you want to use.
Yeah, and I mean, I put out enough content at this point over the years, whether it's, in literature online, that those answers, you got to put in a little work to find
Mm.
those answers. Um,
What
but I mean,
what are you teaching in the MT coping
so
course?
that's just a more introductory level paint course, wall painting, trim painting, kind of prep to get a paint job. It's not like we do everything, but I don't really dig into anything. It's very comprehensive. But it's basically like if you had a room in a house that was drywall and you were going in to paint it.
Mm,
So it's everything from prepping trim, caulking trim, masking, spraying trim. But like even spraying trim, I'm not getting a deep dive into that. It's just like that's my application of paint.
yeah.
Because you could do however many courses on that. So we just kind of cover everything there. But there's definitely takeaways for the professional, but also somebody who just wants to learn, who either paints their own stuff. A homeowner could take away a ton from it. Um, but I mean, even like you were talking about with product, it's not what's the best product. Like, and again, there's so many different best and best for what, but I think a lot of times all of the new products that are coming out of the market are what's the fastest and the
Mm,
easiest. And for me, that's not always necessarily the best. And I think of that a very easy example is all the preformed tile pans. Like I think that there's a time and a place for them. They're a wonderful option, but for me they're not always the best option because you can alter the pan and you can move it around and cut another piece on and splice it, but like I would rather be able to go into a space or a remodel and not have to worry about where the floor joists are and everything else and just know that, I'll be able to center this drain somewhere in this shower pan. Maybe it's not centered from four corners. Maybe it's towards the front more, but I'll be able to go in after the fact and, be able to make this work in a great way and be able to pitch it the way I need to and not having to be altering these expensive pans. And for me, that's a best practice, but that's not the easiest and that's not the fastest practice. So that's just one example, but products are only as good as, and a job is only as good as the weakest link there. And if the product can be amazing and people can botch the install, and it's never going to be right. It's never going to get better. Even if it is easy, it's still easy to mess things up. I think a lot of times when you get comfortable with the product or a process is when you start making mistakes,
Mhm.
because you're like, I've done this so often. I don't have to read the literature. I don't have to brush up on how to do this. I just know how to do it.
I think it's interesting. Like you bring up a good point about as products are put on the market, it's always about making how fast you can complete something. And the shower pan reference is funny because I've seen firsthand where it's like, all right, that was designed to make you know installing a 3x5 shower pan faster. And then all of a sudden the shower's 2.5 by 4.5, and it's like, all right, how do I cut this to make this fit? And the drain's a little off center, so do I have to move the plumb? It's like, this wasn't designed for you.
Yeah,
This product was designed for the standard, like, get this thing dropped in a 3x5, and the plumbing it can go where it goes. And like I think your point about we get so acquainted with these products and using them over and over that we forget that there's other ways to achieve a better result. And it's like, I feel like I'm having deja vu because I think we talked about this at one early podcast, but it's like vinyl siding where it's like emulating clapboard siding, and it was designed to be faster and cheaper and go up. And it's like, yeah, that product has a place in the market, there's no doubt about it. Like, there's plenty of homes out there with vinyl on it, but it's that's not the only way to achieve that look.
exactly.
And it's like, then you get the guys like, all right, let's put up vinyl and figure out how to make this look like wood, and so we can, whatever, we can sell it for a higher profit. It's like, how about you put wood?
Yeah.
How about you spend less time thinking about how you're gonna hide all the seams and just put up the real product? And it just becomes this like this it's almost like mind numbing where it's like these products are, we end up overcomplicating things, I guess is what I'm getting
Hmm.
at. Where it's like, what, rather than building a retaining wall with real masonry, it's like you're building a block wall and then putting a veneer on it. And it's
Yeah,
like, and at the end of the day, it's like it doesn't even look right
I
anyway.
know.
And then
Uh,
you get the efflorescence popping through it, and it's, like, what's going on with this thing?
Same thing, like foundation balls and everything else, where it's like, it doesn't. It's almost, I'd rather you not even try.
We uh probably 2 years ago, we were supposed to build this house, um, and I talked about it before, but, like, it was like we were on our way to with the excavation equipment, and the client called and canceled the job. But when we had priced it, we had all these conversations about, can we, for instance, like, they wanted it was a very historic home, and all the homes in that area had rubble foundations. So we had sat down and said, "Hey, there's two ways to do this. Like, we could adhere a stone to the foundation, and they're basically 2 inches thick, or we can do a brick shelf and put real, field stone and make it look authentic." And they were like, "Oh, I love the look of it. I love it to be authentic." So we had an expensive brick shelf and expensive. I think it was for the whole house. I think it was like to the tune of maybe 70 grand or something like that. Um, and it was an expensive, unnecessary, like, wasn't required by historic, but it was authentic, and we
Yeah,
wanted to move that route. And ultimately, like, the reason that they had canceled the job was because the job had just gotten so expensive with all these things that we discussed. And despite, like, looking back on it, I think that the writing was on the wall that they didn't value it as much as I thought. And a lot of it was driven by how authentic can I build this house. And next thing you know, the house is just too expensive for what they wanted. But
yeah.
it's the same thing. It's like, we looked at that as, all right, let's do it the right way. If we have the opportunity to do it, let's do it the right way, rather than trying to fake it. And you end up spending all this time trying to make it look real, when the reality is it isn't real, and it's not going to look real.
No, and you're spending that much money, and I think it does come down to, what those people value, if that's worth it to them. And Some people just don't know. Some people just don't understand. Obviously, budget comes into play, right? Where,
Totally.
I even think of stuff that I do to my own house where like I do things differently for customers
Mhm.
because I think that I have to educate them in what's right and be like a steward for their house and give them options. And maybe they can't afford this, but let's figure out another solution, or maybe we'll downsize this or integrate these materials instead of that and kind of offset it. And I think that that's our job as contractors to give people options within their budget. And, there's a fine line where you have to realize, hey, this doesn't really stand for what I'm doing. And that's not to say that I can afford what I do for my customers because I can't. I can't afford to spend that much time, but that's the work that I want to be doing. So when I speak about this on the podcast, this isn't everyone's reality. This isn't everyone's situation. This isn't my own personal situation. Stuff that I put in my customers' houses, I would never put in my own house. But when they come to me and they want something or they want the way that we do it, I'm not going to talk them into doing something that's less labor intensive, or hey, unless it's a budget thing where it's like, hey, we really want to, this is our showpiece. Can we kind of scale it down over here? And then I have to make the call if that's something that I want to do and I can stand behind or not.
Mm.
But I like to give customers options for that. I guess all of this is kind of hot on me banging my head against the wall for 2 days finishing these built-ins. I With everything that's going on with COVID, I could not use the same caulking that I typically use. Um, so I tried a different caulking. I've used it on a couple jobs where I sprayed like latex or an acrylic, just a trim paint, not latex, an acrylic, or I think we spray urethane enamel sometimes. Sometimes I spray waterborne lacquer on our trim in a satin or semi gloss finish, and I've never had issues with it. And I primed these built-ins. I did all my prep work. I caulked it. I primed them again. And I noticed kind of right away that it was almost like the primer wasn't sticking to the caulk, but it wasn't that bad. So I
It
shot
was like
over it.
spidering, right?
Yeah, but it
Like spider
wasn't.
cracks?
Yeah, but it was like very faint. So I sprayed over it again with primer, and then I sanded everything down and started finishing. And my first coat of finish went on. It looked great, happy with it. And then I get into scuffing that for my second coat, and I'm like, "What the heck?" It's basically crackling over all of my caulking, almost like if you paint over silicone, it almost streaks and then kind of bubbles and, um, like, sticks together. It wasn't like that, it was just kind of spidering, and you could tell it was curling up on the edges. And I'm like, Jesus, this must be this new caulk. So I'm looking on the caulk. It's the same primer I always use. I'm shooting a finish that I've used before. Um, and this is kind of referring back to what I was saying before, that like I have a system in place. So when something starts to go wrong, I have a baseline to go from. So like the one difference in my system right now is the caulking. So I'm like,
Mm.
it must be the caulking. So I sand that all down, get out what I can, and then I recalk it with another caulk. And I'm like, I'm gonna make, maybe the caulk was just still a little wet. I'm gonna let this sit for the weekend. So I let it sit for the weekend. I come in Monday morning, tack everything down, spray it again, looks great. Hour later, same thing. And I'm like, oh no. At this point, I like second coats on. It's all done. I've already primed it twice. And I'm like, I just don't know what to do here. Maybe it's an adhesion issue. Again, like the issues might, at this point, I thought it was the caulking, but then I'm like, I tried a different caulking. Um, so maybe it's an adhesion issue. So then I try brushing over it. That doesn't work. So then I'm like, all right, instead of wasting all my time on these cabinets, I made up a bunch of sample boards and just like did 4 different types of caulk. The primer I used, a different primer, this finish, that finish, and I sprayed everything, and I basically came to the determination that this finish that I was using, and for some reason, the primer that I've used before was not adhering to any caulking. It didn't matter. I mean, maybe it did matter. I only had 4 different types of caulk in my truck at this point, but it wasn't adhering to any of that. So ended up finding a primer, which was a pretty inexpensive, just like Kills primer that that adhered to the caulking after all this. So I had to sand all of that down, basically get off all the stuff that was on there, and then layer a bunch of primer on that, resand everything, and then reshoot it all. Which was probably at the end of the day, probably 2 days worth of me wasting time and trying to figure out what was going on. And for me, as frustrating as that is, that's the type of stuff that I ran into when I started finishing and spraying cabinetry 10 years ago, 12 years ago, every time. Like
Yeah.
every time I would go to finish something, I'd run into it like that. And I a lot of times because I have a system and I can interchange parts of that and I know how they all play together and I know what I can get away with, I don't a lot of times run into these issues. So it was frustrating to run into that. But if I didn't go through all of that and I didn't have the experience that I had, and I was just like, hey, you know what, I'm gonna paint some cabinets. Tell me what I should use to paint with them, and I ran into that. Where would I turn
Right.
to try and sort that out? And now I'm in the middle of a customer's house. I have their whole living room blocked off. I have a built-in that I've spent a week prepping and painting, and now what do I do? And, like, I don't think that that's fair to put yourself in that position. I didn't panic because I'm like, "I can fix this. No matter what, I can fix this." But, had that been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have fully panicked
Mm.
and been like, "What up?" Like, I gotta cut all this caulking out. I gotta reshoot it. And like I didn't. By the time I figured out what I had to do, it probably took me a half a day to fix.
And
Um,
yeah, and just to like repeat, like the way you figured that out was by doing those samples.
yeah,
Where it's
w-
like you're absolutely right. I remember after we talked about this yesterday, or I don't know if I said it in our text, but the I remember painting with my brother. Like my brother had a house we were renovating, and the same thing happened. Anytime we kept painting the crown molding, and the caulking was spider cracking. And I remember my brother was saying, "You must have put it on too light. You must have, like, licked your finger too much and scraped too much off." So
yeah,
we did it again and the same thing, and, at that time, like, we probably said, "Screw it," and just left it and moved on. But to kinda take a step back and run through the samples rather than going through that reaction of, like, ripping it all out and redoing it, you know, I think is an important lesson here where it's, you kind of have to you kind of have to take a breath and step back and figure out like what exactly is going wrong. And I don't know if you have determined it, but it's like you were using a primer and a finish that you've always used. So your brain immediately says those aren't the issue.
yeah,
And it's like, all right, you used four different caulkings and it's doing it for everything. It's like, all right, well, how is that case, if I know my primer and finish work, where it's like, well, maybe the primer froze
yeah. And like
or
maybe they switched the whatever the
chemical.
formula is in the
Maybe it,
primer.
maybe it was a bad batch of primer.
Yeah,
Maybe like there's so many factors where it's like it could have been the finish or the primer that you've always used, and it just happened to be a bad batch.
yeah,
And you would have never determined that, and you would have sat there and recocked it with a thousand different things until you whatever, maybe you use the caulking that you usually use, and then it happens again, and then you're like, "Okay, what in the
exactly.
actual F is going on
And
here?"
I mean, it's even, I basically I came home and I have 6 or 7 different types of primers in my basement where
Mm,
it's like I'm just going to bring all these with me and I'm gonna see what works. And I found one that worked, and that was pretty much the solution. And it wasn't even a one coat thing. It was like multiple coats of that building it up over this, and then I didn't have any issues after that. And I to this point I don't know what created that issue. Um, but the next time that I go to use my system, I will ensure that I'm good post prime coat, that I'm not like pushing finish coat
mm.
where if something looks off at that point, I'm not going to keep moving ahead with it thinking this is going to sort itself out, where that was just me getting comfortable.
I think that I mean, any painter that might be listening to this right now is probably gonna say, duh, Nick. Like, obviously that's the case. But I think, being I wasn't a painter. I never really spent much time even trying to perfect it. And I remember always getting to a point where I was like, all right, that's close. Like I can spray finish and the finish will kind of hide that little scratch or hide that little divot. Or, I'm painting baseboard with a brush and I realize I forgot to fill a nail hole. So I take a little paint and I fill the nail hole with the paint and just hope it dries and flattens out. But like that's very much the wrong mentality, and that's why I think they're looking at you like, how do I achieve that finish? And it's exactly that. It's all of the prep work and making sure that you are good before finish coat. Where it's
Yeah,
like,
basically your finish should just be the color,
right,
Like all your just assume that your finish coat is just going to take your primer and change it to a different color. And then
right,
if you get everything looking good with primer, then your finish will do its job. But a lot of different finishes will do their job at that point. I could spray, a dozen different products that gonna get me that same result. And it could be something as much, it could be like Benjamin Ward Vance.
mm,
If it's a big enough project where you're only getting one coat per day, it's a great product that you can use, but there's issues with it. It tends to sag. It has a long cure time, but it can yellow if you're using a white. But all of this is learned again through experience. But like I just painted a job, I don't know, a few months ago with that, and it's a great product and it works well and it's super durable. But a small job where you're looking to get multiple coats on a day and sand, like I wouldn't pick that.
mm,
But a bigger project, it's a great finish to use for trim paint. But again, that's all just kind of getting that experience and figuring out what works for you and having a system where if something happens while you're using that system, you now have a baseline or you know where to turn. And maybe it's like my situation where something's just off. Maybe it's the primer, maybe it's the finish. If I really wanted to figure it out, I could leave my stuff set up and I could do more samples with that primer, with this finish without buying something new and isolate it. But I have enough confidence moving forward that, you know, I'll try something when I go to do the next job and I'll just keep an eye out for it. And if it doesn't work at that point, I know I'm going to stop there and go another route. But at this point, I've spent too many years developing this system to throw it all away because one job didn't go right.
right.
Um, so I'm gonna stick with that, and I'll see how it goes on the next one. But I'm not gonna recreate the wheel at this point. Everything was good except for one part of that system was off this time, and I couldn't find a reason why. But I'm gonna go ahead and say that it was just a fluke.
You've said before that you don't particularly like painting.
Um, So I used to really hate painting, um, because I was never charging the right amount for it.
So
So
you
I
felt
u
rushed.
Yeah, and I felt like I was never getting paid for what I was putting out. And it's also that's one aspect of it. So now at this point, I know that I'm getting paid for the amount of work that's going into it, so that makes things way more enjoyable, where you're not
Mm,
just like, "I'm sanding this for the 4th time, and I'm only getting paid for a change of color," which was silly on my part, but I was also developing my systems doing that. Um, but it's also like when you get into finishing of cabinets, you can chase things, and you're like looking to achieve this perfect finish, and there's nothing perfect in our world. And you can spray an entire cabinet or an entire set of built-ins and have one sag where it's like now I have to sand that out and I have to respray that. And I think that with my personality type and wanting things to be right and as close to perfect as possible, I can drive myself insane where it's
mm.
like everything's good and I just found a hair in that and then I go to sand that instead of just like pulling the hair out and then I'm respraying something. um, so sometimes it feels as if it's never ending because it's tough for me to just be like, "Yeah, it's good enough."
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the cost side of it, and I remember there was a short stint when I first started building cabinetry in the garage, and I think you had turned me on to some of the product that you were spraying, and I remember I bought um
HVLP gun.
yeah, and the gun and the paint, and it was like I've always hated painting, but when I started spraying and seeing the results of it, it became really like, when it came out good, it was super gratifying.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, this is fun. Like, I can see the fruits when you're spraying that coat and you're seeing everything flatten out and dry, and you know that's when I started realizing, like, this is fun. But
Yeah.
same thing, I was never charging for it. I was in my shop for hours, and same thing. It's like you find a piece of dust and it's like, screw it, let's respray it, you
Yeah.
know.
Then when it starts to go bad, it just, like, it seems to never end, and then you're like, "You know what? If I would've just left that, it would've looked better than this
Yep.
now."
Or it's like it's drying and, like, you try to get the hair out while it's
Yeah.
drying, and then you have,
You
like, a
know
scrape
not
across
to.
the finish.
Yeah, it is it's one of those things that if that's your personality type and you'd like that things to be right and, trying to achieve that kind of perfection, it's one of those trades that you can see the reward of the effort that you put into your protection, your air, um, movement, your air filtering, your tools, the materials, everything that you used, and it's almost like when I go to spray something, a final coat, like these cabinets where it's all shelves and, I have to worry about overspray and there's certain areas that I can't hit twice where I get like kind of nervous doing it, where it's like, it's almost like you're showing up, it's a sporting event and it's like now you have to perform. And I don't know, I get a little bit anxious leading into that. And then when it's done, you're like, "All right, I don't wanna move because there's overspray on the ground, and I don't wanna kick it up," so you just, like, sit down and sit on a bench and watch things start to, like, dry, and it's very rewarding. I do like it. I used to hate it. I wouldn't wanna do it every day, but, it is fun, but it's very, very frustrating to learn. Especially, there's some times with finishes where it could be relative humidity in the room, or
That was
outside.
that was one of the more interesting when I had talked to that guy, Thomas May, and we were chatting about the Cerelac, and, I was interested in learning about it because it's water-based.
Yeah,
And, I think that as, like, regulations become more difficult, we're gonna be using a lot more water-based, and when you talk to anyone here in the US when that finish, they don't do a lot of water-based because they struggle with it.
yeah,
And I'd asked, like, "Do you struggle with the finish?" And he said, "No, but our booth is heated and, I don't know if it was dehumidified or whatever, but it like the climate in the booth had to be perfect, like
yeah,
within like 5 degrees or something like that." And he said, "And that's a really big part of why our finish comes out so good is because we control the climate within that booth." And you don't
and
always.
your finish too, like, they make heaters for your material so that
Right.
now you're putting your material on in the same temperature of the stuff that you're shooting, so that
Mhm.
it's not like, you have a warm cabinet that's getting a cooler paint sprayed on it.
Right. I can hear half the people listening right now, like, "All right, screw it. I'm just not getting into finish. This is too much. I'm not
Yeah.
buying a paint can heater, and I'm not heating my booth, and, I'm just gonna hire someone to do it."
But I guess, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying where I don't feel like I'm really providing any value to somebody by telling you I sprayed this with a 920 tip, like
Right.
flat tip. It's just there's so many things that's not what's going to help you. Um and it's not like me being arrogant, it's not me being rude, it's just I don't think that really helps you out at all. That's like going to a framer who's framing complex roofs and be like, "What kind of hammer do you use?" And be like, "All right, I got this, like,
He's like, "I don't fucking know."
I got the Martinez hammer, I'm good now." um so I just there's a lot to it and it's very overwhelming and there's people who just do that. Like you could spend your lifetime just doing that and never perfect it.
Yeah.
Um and I'd like to at least honor a lot of those people who do that and don't, kind of make light of what we're doing in their trade. It's funny because I actually sent the vendor an email like, "Hey, I'm running into this issue. I've used this finish before." And his response was like, "Despite what you hear on Facebook, this won't work." And I was like super pissed because I was like, "Yeah, that's where I'm getting my information from Facebook. That's it. That's why I emailed you." And
Yeah.
like, I don't buy a ton of stuff from them, so it's not like, who the hell are you? But I
Right.
emailed them back and was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of bummed to hear that, you're thinking I'm getting my information from Facebook and not like experience and wanting to put out the best product." Then they responded with like a much nicer, more in-depth email with like potential fixes and things that he has ran into, which was better, and then explained that like he sells a ton of material to cabinet refinishers, and there a lot of them are on these forums and Facebook pages and groups that like kick over to him. Um,
Mm.
so I guess he just grouped me in that category, but I was pissed. I was like, I
Well,
don't get my shit from Facebook, you
that's
jerk.
the
That's
but that's the thing with those forums and, like, even I mean, social media as well is, like, people are talking about unconventional ways of achieving things. It's like, we we've talked about it too, where it's like some of these guys doing high gloss, like, they're not using the products that they might be
yeah,
promoting. It's and or there's more steps than what goes into it than you think.
yeah,
And it's like, that's just the reality of it. It's like guys are in these message boards or even on their own experimenting with different ways to achieve things. And when they achieve it, they're not always going to promote or tell you how they achieved it. Just like you're not going to give them, the tip that you used or the product that you sprayed because they achieved that by experimenting on their own.
yeah. And a lot of the people that are looking to develop those systems are almost looking for a shortcut, like a product or a system that's going to get them that result
Right.
without the amount of work.
Right.
And they like sometimes they can do it and sometimes it does work out, but a lot of times when something is the way it is, eh, it's that way for a reason, and it's that way because it's been getting done that way for a million
Right.
years, and there are better ways of doing things now, but it's not always the case. Like, sometimes you just have to put in the effort.
Right, and it's like a perfect example, and what I was kind of alluding to is like Fine Paints of Europe. We've used it. I think it's, a great product. But the problem is that now we're getting people, architects, designers, specking, hey, we want this high gloss, blah blah blah, and we want to use Fine Paints of Europe, and then you do it. It's like, well, no, I want it mirror finished. It's like, okay, that's not accomplished by just using Fine Paints of Europe out of the can.
Yeah,
It's a high gloss product, but it's not like what you're seeing in this photo or this project that was buffed
yeah,
or it has a top coat on it or whatever the case might be, but it's not just poured out of the can.
yeah.
And that's like you said, it's, oh, I just wanted to achieve the easy way to do it. Where it's like, okay, but it doesn't come down to the product.
And
The easy
again, that even goes back to vendors, like, they're there to sell paint, right?
Right.
They're gonna sell that what's in that bucket is the best thing in the world.
Yeah, Fine Paints told me that you could achieve a mirror finish with this. It's like, you can,
Yeah,
not out of the can,
yeah, not just putting it
or
on with a
depend
brush.
or maybe a distorted mirror,
Yeah.
you
Um,
know?
and then, if you're looking to get you see those pictures and maybe it is fine paints of Europe they're using, like, there's ways of doing that
Mm,
to get that finish, but it has to cure for a long time. And like it's
right,
an oil finish that's slow cure. There's issues with that. It's a super slow curing high gloss finish, which you see everything. You're painting stuff on site in an uncontrolled environment. The AC kicks on, somebody takes a step, there's dust in the air, and it
mm,
takes 12 hours to cure. What do you think's going to happen in that finish? Like, shit's going
right,
to stick in it.
mm,
But that's not stuff that you see. So even just selling those jobs, you have to be careful of what people's expectations are because you have designers, you have homeowners, you have architects who see it. And it's like, yeah, what that looks like in a picture may not be what that looks like in real life.
right.
and you have to be careful of that. If I were to sell another gloss job, like, I know what I would have to do going into that, and I mean, that's all just a learning experience for me.
Same, and it's, and like I said, it's just the unfortunate side of product, the unfortunate marketing side of product trying to sell something that is easier, just easier. And then this actually goes back to our conversation last week with art from duration. Like we were talking to Keith, and like we're
What's the
drilling.
catch, man?
Yeah, what's the catch? Like, you're telling me this is an easier product to use, to cut, to do whatever. It's like there's gotta be a catch. And frankly, like, yes, they're a partner here on our podcast, but the truth is, and, the truth is it does check the boxes, and it does what it says it does. Is it the best product on the market? No, I can't say that. But, for what it solves between, I prefer 10 times over PVC. And it's like, well, is it better than wood? It's like, in what
Yeah.
aspect?
I mean, for what it is and the limitations of it, like, there's certain places that I wouldn't use it, right? Where it's
Right,
like, if there's gonna be a weed whacker going near it, maybe not your best choice. Like, even with paint on it, it could get damaged more easily. Like, there may be different
right.
options, if it's like but it's the same thing as anything else. Like, if you're using wood in that situation, or, you wouldn't trim something on a stair with like an MDF that's going to get beat up. So there's certain
Right.
places where you should be substitute, but that's all just experience where it's like, hey, we tried it on this, it didn't work out. So now this is our go-to in that
Mhm.
situation. But I think that comes with experience. But like, for general purpose siding and trim and windows, that aren't taking abuse like that, like a weed whacker, somebody kicking it, um, it's hard to say that there's a lot of downsides to the
Right.
product.
And that's and I think you hit it where it's like it comes to experience, but it also comes to, like, understanding that not one thing is gonna solve everything.
Exactly. But
And,
but vendors and, like, tool companies are going to tell you that they do. I mean, it's
it
same with construction companies. Like, they're
right,
gonna tell you that on Instagram especially, they're gonna tell you that, and that, like, that it's gonna be faster and less money and less headache. Like, a lot of times it's just bullshit. Like, that's just marketing.
right. And, well, I mean, that's, like, one thing we wanted to get into is talking about the arrogance in today's market, and I think that that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, yep. I and I think that it is for a couple of different reasons. And I guess what I had kind of mentioned to you about this is, I forget what I was listening to, but they were saying how oftentimes being successful breeds confidence.
Mhm.
Um and I agree with that. And I think, that a lot of times if you begin to fail, it kind of checks your confidence. Or if somebody calls you on something, or, you know, for example, say you've never failed an inspection on a job, and you're walking into the next inspection, I'm good, I got this, and you fail that inspection, you're going to be like, well, maybe I don't pass every inspection where
Mhm.
somebody calls you on your crap, and that there's this really fine line between being confident and arrogant, and I don't. I think that it's up to the person perceiving that as to where they draw that line, but I think that you have to be important of doing that yourself as well, because I know personally a lot of people who don't know me personally will be like, "Well, I see what you're doing, and it comes off as cocky and arrogant." And I don't feel that I am that way. I feel that I'm confident in a lot of things that I do because I've done them for so long and I've failed at them for so long. Um, but I think that part of the issue with the arrogance right now in our industry, and people saying I'm booked out so long and we only do jobs for this much, is because they've only known success so
Mhm.
far. They haven't had enough failures. And I think that when people kind of step into success and don't get enough reality checks, that oftentimes that confidence leads to arrogance, even becoming a leader and everything else in our industry. Where if if you spend 15 years working on your company and developing your systems and you have ups and downs, highs and lows, you're going to be a much better, more well-rounded leader than somebody who's only had successes, because while they may be confident in being a leader, they're going to lack a lot of the character traits that you get from failing, or you get, like empathy,
Mm.
hard work, realizing that there's other points of view, and kind of being able to adapt. And I think that a lot of people the past couple years, everything's been go go go. Everyone's been making money and successful, and they're losing sight of that.
Agreed. And just to relate this like to where I'm at, I feel as though for me, we've definitely positioned ourselves now where I thought like what you were saying, like we only do projects this size and we only work for these type of clients. And uh, that's who I am. That's what I'm communicating to potential leads, and and doing it with confidence, and because we've been successful with that. But to think back, let's just the last 2 years for NS Builders, inside, you're not seeing this through any of the media or social media or anything like that, were the worst years for us. From at the end of the year when we looked at how we did, they were the worst year. I'm sorry, financially for us, and and there was a multitude of reasons. One, we had a project go really bad. We had a very difficult client. We unfortunately weren't able to complete the project. We tried to uphold what we wanted to do on that project, and we just and unfortunately, I don't feel as though we were given the opportunity to finish it. And and that took a toll financially on us because we didn't complete the project, etc. There we weren't paid in full. I don't want to get too much into that, but then on top of that, we were hit with the pandemic. Then on top of that, we're also trying to stop doing projects that we were losing money at, the smaller projects, because we were trying to put too much management on it. And one of the things I said early on is when we were in the beginning of shutdowns and lockdowns and all of this, is that I didn't want to change. I didn't want to adapt our business, and I think we talked about this with Trevor Holtz from New York,
Yeah.
and he was like, I want to be able to, like, we talked about being agile and being able to adapt your business when business was tough, where it's like if you had to get into doing something else, you would do it. And I communicated to my team that I didn't want to do that, even though in the back of my head I knew that if it got really bad, then of course we would have to make a pivot. But looking way back, everyone was saying, "Oh my gosh, we're so busy. We have so much work. We're booked out for 2 years." And I was being quiet where it's like, I'm not.
Yeah.
It's like I could be, but I'm being really selective. And I'll tell you right now that there were weeks or even months where I was questioning my decision, in the sense that why am I being such a hard ass? Why am I not taking on these projects? I could potentially put this business out of business because I'm being stubborn and saying that I deserve better than this and I deserve a better project and a higher paying client and blah blah blah. And fast forward to today, we're in a great spot. We spent the last 2 years developing our systems. Developed really robust accounting. Like, we are on top of our shit, and we would not have been able to do that if we had taken advantage of the opportunity to get into different markets and fire through it. And instead we just rolled through shit for 2 years, just constantly being beaten down, but always focused on what our goal was beyond 2 years, beyond what we were dealing with right then and there. And I can't sit here and say that was the move. I can't sit here and say that's what I can attribute our success at, because I don't feel as though we've hit that point yet. I feel like we are at the beginning of seeing that light where we want to be. And I hope that a year from now I can look back and say those those 2 years, they sucked, but it was the only way we were able to achieve what we achieved.
So how do you think that, your experience over the past 2 years as a leader of NS builders and, you know, with a group and a team of individuals who work with you, what do you think how does that affect your future, as the leader? These tough times, these, kind of tumultuous past, and the struggles that you've gone through versus had the past 2 years been a financial and business success?
Well, first off, I did a terrible job communicating to my team where we were headed. And, something I've talked about before is that we do these sit downs with the entire team twice a year. And this most recent, back in November, when I sat down with everyone, I realized that I was doing a bad job. Like, a lot of people didn't understand what our next move was, where they were headed into the next job. And it was because I was so focused on getting to these projects and starting these projects and getting them off the ground that I was letting a lot of my team almost on autopilot and not thoroughly communicating. So, in that, I think that, we have unfortunately lost people to other companies, but we've also had to let go of people because we didn't have the resources to train them or put them in the or we had improperly placed them within the team, and we didn't have a place to move them where they would have made a better fit. So, thinking back, like, what does that mean as a leader and for the team? It was a huge learning lesson for me, and it was a lot of you know one of the talks, not the one of the talks, the end of the year talk I had with my entire team. We sat in the office, and I really just kind of, you know let it all out in the sense of, like, I'm just going to explain who I am, what my goals are, what I want for the team, what I want for you guys. And I'm going to also be really open, honest, transparent, like, where we failed, where I think we could do better, what I hope we can do in the future. And ultimately left that conversation saying, going forward, I'm going to use the excuse of I don't have the time to not be honest with each other. And I'm going to be, when I don't think someone's doing a good job or that they could be doing a better job, I want to be open and honest about that. But I equally want my team to be open and honest with me, where it's like, Nick, I feel like you're spending too much time on the podcast and you're not on the job enough. You're focused, you're like, and that's impacting, my love for working at NS Builders. And, in having those conversations, you know, I think that if we had not had those, we would have continued to drift out of alignment. And the only way that we can continue to grow in the path that I want for the company, and I hope that my team wants for the company, is by communicating that and being open and transparent about what that is. Because ultimately, I've lost really great guys because they didn't share the same vision.
Yeah.
And and for me, like, that's completely okay. Like, that's a fine reason to leave when, you know, it's not a great reason to hear someone wanting to go somewhere else where they share the same vision, but they just didn't see that we were capable of achieving
Yeah,
it.
because then it's opportunity that's really lost. I guess, you know, even thinking of this, kind of what makes somebody a good leader, and there's no one right answer, but I think that that main thing, if even I can kind of relate back to being on, sports teams when I was younger, and the person who was a captain or who you looked up to, they were confident in what they were doing. You know, they believed that you could win. Um, they believed anything. It was a mindset that they had that I think that is indicative of what a good leader is. But I didn't want a leader or a captain on my team that thought we were invincible. You know, that I wanted somebody who kind of did struggle, who didn't always have it easy, who had failures, who learned from them, and they were this well-versed, well-rounded kind of person. And they, I guess, they were diverse in a lot of their experience. And I think that that's the same thing as a leader of a business, right? Where I don't want Nick to just have a successful 5 years where he thinks he's untouchable. and everything that he does, he's God's gift to the construction world, and he can do no wrong because I think that your employees will end up taking on that mindset, and I think that that
Mhm.
affects customers, right? Like, you as a business owner and as a leader, there's far more to it than just being confident. And I think that if it's only confidence in your leadership, that a lot of times turns into arrogance because you haven't
Totally.
struggled enough. And I think that that's a huge turnoff for people. I think that I'm even just sitting here and thinking of terms that kind of would make a good leader. And when I look up to somebody and it's like I want to follow their role, I not only want them to be confident, but I do want to see, that I want them to be relatable to me. I want to see somebody who's vulnerable, that they are affected by things. I want them to be humble, empathetic, sympathetic, structured, strong, decisive, understanding. And I think that a lot of a lot of those character traits, they come from being successful, but I also think that they come from failure. And I think that most of the lessons that we learn, um, again, kind of relating it back to sports, where it's like, I don't think that you learn from beating a team 100-0. Like, there's not that many takeaways from that, and I
Right.
don't think that your wins
Because you
define
just
you
look
as
at
much
that.
as your losses.
Right. You 100 to 0 is, or 101, whatever you said is, I'm better than them.
Exactly, and that, like, that I don't think that that's you're not making changes based on
Right.
that, right? Like, it's like, "No, we're good. The whatever we did worked, so let's keep going that way."
Mhm.
It's that a lot of times you can watch, so I still follow, like, college wrestling and even the international wrestling circuit, and you see a younger guy coming up, and he ends up having a loss, like, in the middle of the season, the beginning of the season, that ends up changing their entire career path, where it's like, if they hadn't had that loss, they probably still would have been good, but that loss was the catalyst for them to realize that they're not on top of the world, that they still can be beaten, and that they have so much more work to do. And I think that you benefit far more from your failures and your losses than from
Mm.
your wins.
Yeah,
Like,
I
you come out of a job, right, and it's like a total success, that feels great. But
it
what are
does.
the, like, true lessons and takeaways from that? "Oh, we'll just do it the same next time?"
I had a conversation the other day with I did a debrief with 2 of our clients, and I went into that, and I actually Googled, like, some of the, best questions to ask on a debrief because I wanted to make sure I asked the right questions. But I also paid attention to making sure that I didn't frame the questions in either, positive or negative, meaning like, what could we have done better? Because when you ask that question, then they immediately think about all the things that you did that sucked.
Yeah.
Where it's like now I'm putting them in a negative mindset. But I also didn't want to say, what did you really like? Because then it's the same thing where, I remember one of the questions I was like, what should we continue to do? And just left it at that. And they're like, oh, that's a really great question. I think you should continue to blah 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 blah. And is there anything that we should stop doing? Well, you should, and it the conversation went like much better, but and neither of that, like, they were successful in many ways, but they were also, there was frustrating and things that they weren't, you know completely happy about. And I took the opportunity to reach out to the architect on one of the jobs. I'm like, hey, would love to do a debrief. And something I said a couple minutes ago is, about being open and honest. I used that same line in this conversation. I said, listen, I don't want this to be you were a great builder. I loved doing this with you. I love the fact that you did this, and we'd love to do a job together again. And if you have work, send it my way and I'll do the same. I didn't want that. I said I want this to be honest. Like, you know, tell me what you like, be super honest and tell me what we need to like what we need to stop doing or what we need to keep doing. And when I asked the question of what we should stop doing, it was like, I don't wanna say the floodgates opened up, but it was like this sigh of, like, relief that, okay, you've asked the question, I'm gonna explain to you where we struggled with you.
Yeah.
And you're like, I feel like the human reaction is as you hear this to be defensive and explain why it happened.
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, you guys were behind schedule," and it's like, and you're immediately like, "Well, we were behind schedule because you added work and well, COVID is a thing now. Did you not hear about?" It's like, and I made it a point. I was like, "Just listen. Just sit there and listen, and understand that if they felt as though you were behind schedule, but in your mind you weren't, and all of the schedule changes were justifiable, then what that says is that it wasn't that you were behind schedule. It was that you are a poor communicator and you didn't communicate schedule changes efficiently
Yeah.
in a way that made sense. And one of the things I remember, one of the clients I had asked, or one of the things, what was, I'm trying to think of the question, but basically the client said there was times that I felt like I was being strong armed into a decision. And here I am like, "Whoa, like
Yeah.
this is a serious accusation. Talk to me more. Like what are we talking about here?" And I remember him explaining like there was a product it was a hinge product, and he was like, "Remember when we built those doors and like you guys basically came to the table and said we have to use these hinges, and they were a couple $100 a piece, and like, I you basically like came to the table and said like there was no other option, like I had to use those." And I remember writing that down and thinking about it. I'm like, you know, he did have to use those in order for him to, he uses that door every day, and now he thinks it's the greatest. Like he doesn't think about it because it operates so great.
Yeah.
Where it's like if we had used something else, it wouldn't have operated well, and it would have been, hey, can you adjust this door? Or, hey, what's up? Why does this door kind of stick? Or whatever the case might be. But again, it wasn't that I didn't think we strong armed him, but he did. So what that says to me is that we did a poor job communicating the reason as to why that hinge
Yeah.
needed to be used.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like maybe you just said, "Hey," like maybe with stuff like that, I think a lot of times customers don't have an issue paying that premium if they understand why they're paying that premium. And I think, that comes down to being a good salesman, being able to communicate with them, and that not salesman in the type of in respect to like upselling or anything like that, but you're selling a product, you're selling a service, you're now selling a door. Are you explaining to them what they're getting with that and why you're going that route rather than just saying, "Hey, this is what we have to use."
Yeah, exactly. And that, you know, the takeaway from all these conversations is that, right, and at the end of it, everyone felt great about the job. They felt as though they got, that the project came out better than expected. All these great things, but for me, what I took away from that is that we need to improve our communication,
Yeah.
and it always comes back to communication, and the fact that and same thing with the architect. Even the architect said there was times where they felt as though we basically came to the table and said, no, this is like that's non-negotiable. We're gonna do it our way. And I was like, man, like, yeah, there's definitely times where I feel strongly opinionated on something, and I might be making an executive decision, but I still need to make sure that I'm communicating that in a way that everyone's on board with it.
Yeah. And and that's the takeaway, and that kind of touches on what I was saying, where if you go in and you ask these people on your debrief how things went, and they're like, "Oh, it was great, it was wonderful," and maybe that's the truth, maybe it isn't, but, like, there's no growth there at that point.
Right.
Like, your company's walking away from that the same as when you walked out of that job.
Mhm.
You go in and somebody kind of gives you some constructive criticism, or, you know, takes a few stabs at you even, and it's
Right.
like, "Well, I need to start thinking about this." So now you walk away from this job and there's room for growth there. There's room to improve, and at least you're aware of that now, where if you weren't, like, you would walk out of there be like, "Damn, we nailed this job with this architect, like, we're definitely getting all his jobs right now," and, like, that ends up kind of breeding this arrogance where you're like, "You know what? Not every job with this architect is guaranteed." They weren't, like, 100% thrilled. If we work with them again, we have to do a better job than we
Right.
did before, and I think that, I that ends up your customers see that, your vendors see that, your all of your employees see that, your partners see that, and I think that's what's really important, and really develops you as a leader, especially, that it's kind of with respect to the market right now because everything's insane and people want you and people want work done and there's no shortage of work. So I think that those reality checks are very important, to ensure that you're not kind of, your head isn't growing bigger than your shoulders that it's on.
Right. And something you just said, like, get guaranteed work from the architect. And I remember one of the things that conversation brought up was that, you know, up until this point, like, we had talked about doing other work. We had talked about, all the things that they liked about us. And it was only at this time where it was revealed to me that, if we were to do another job together, this is the one thing that I would like to have a better handle on.
Mhm.
And I was like, "Man, that is so valuable to know." Because at that point, when he had disclosed that, he was like, "I'm not sure what the best way to, get a better handle on, schedule for another job." And we sat there collectively and figured out a way to do that. And like how like we both talk about it out, out loud, and we're like, all right, this is the way we can move forward from here and take another opportunity to kind of prove what we have learned. And like you said, the arrogance is oftentimes, you know beyond failure, right? Where it's like that's obviously a reality check, but there's also um you know, th the ignorance, that's what I was getting at, of how well a job went, where it's like, you don't ask the
Yeah,
question.
out of sight,
You
out of mind.
Yeah, it's like, "You know what? The job's done, everyone's
I
happy,
got paid.
yeah, I'm moving on." And it's like, but you are exactly what you said, you are not learning from this.
Mhm.
Not everything was great, and if you can't learn from this, then eventually someone else is going to come and move past you
Yeah, and
and
that like,
and
so
take your
that's
position.
exactly, and that, like, even while you're saying that, what's in my head is return customers, right? Where it's
Right,
like, my goal is if I work for somebody, assuming that I liked working for that person, that I want them to call me back. Like,
right.
when they have another job coming up, I want them to use me. And if they don't, I'm like, damn, I didn't do something right. And maybe they're thrilled with the work, but like you said, it was a schedule issue or a
Right.
communication issue or a budget issue, or they thought that I was arrogant or that there was no wiggle room on decisions, or I didn't take the time to really make them feel like they had a hand in this,
Mhm.
where if I were to, maybe those people still don't hire me again, but I think that if you do debrief and you kind of go over that, maybe that opens the door to, hey, you know what, we really liked this and this about working for them, and the concerns that we had or the issues that we had we just discussed, so we're going to take a chance at going with them again, hoping that they kind of take that into account and make some changes and the next job is better.
Yeah, and as you're as you're saying that, I'm thinking of an analogy, and I just wanna say it out loud, but it's like, being in a race where it's like every lap you go through, you're doing the same thing and you're doing a good job, and no one's telling you on the other end, like, "Hey, that corner you got to take tighter," or "Hey, see if you can get a little speed out of the straightaway." But meanwhile, the guy behind you has been improving every lap, and it's like, and then he comes right up beside you, and then he passes you, and
Yeah.
it's and then you're in the position of, why didn't that client call me back?
Yep.
It's like someone just passed you, and you're no longer in first place. Now you're in second. And it's like, if you don't continuously improve, then how are you going to maintain second place?
And that's just, being aware of kind of what's going on with your company and understanding that you're not invincible and that you don't do everything right. And that every day is an opportunity to learn something and grow and better yourself and better your business and become a better leader. um, and I think that those struggles and hearing those kind of weaknesses, that's what shapes you, and
Mm,
that's what makes you become a better person. It's not somebody saying, "Great job, Nick," like, "You did a good job." It's these things where, like, somebody tells me, "Good job," I forget about that 2 seconds later.
yeah,
Somebody tells me, like, "This really annoyed me, and you did that," like, that'll eat at me,
right.
where it's like, "What do I have to do to change?" And I think that that's so important, especially when you have people working for you, and when you're in customers' homes and everything.
Yeah, I think that I'm thinking, like, without the opportunity to get that feedback and and being blinded, again, about this whole arrogance thing and choosing ignorance, to move forward, you were you're just you're becoming complacent.
Yeah,
And I think that, it is very, quote unquote, on trend to be high end and luxury and charge a lot of money. And I charge a big fee. Like, because it's talked about, and it's, in this world we live in, is so much more transparent, and everyone has a view into what everyone is doing at all times, that, you know, what happens is when you don't hit when you aren't successful, and maybe you get that feedback that does eat at you, that is negative, that, and it wasn't asked, it was just given to you because you did a bad job. What happens is that all of a sudden you close down, you ignore everything around you, and it eats at you. And, you know sometimes it eats at you to a point where you give up on it,
yeah,
where it's like, to be in front of it and to sit down with your client and your architect and have these conversations and be open to hearing the criticism, you know like you said, it shapes you, but also puts that client and these architects in a position where they feel as though they are helping shape you. So if now this architect thinks, about the next project, and like, hey, who are we gonna hire? It's like, you know what? It would be great to hire Nick, because remember we had that really raw conversation and talked about all the things he should improve on. And, it seems like he's been working on that and he's been improving that. Like, we told him everything that we needed him to do. Let's give him another shot and see if he can do it.
and where that's really important is not now. Again, everyone's slammed right now. Everyone has work right now. There's no shortage of work. There's no shortage of leads. But when this is really going to help you is when you're looking, like we had spoke with art, kind of sustaining the same size
Hmm.
business when things slow down, because it's not always going to be like it is right now, and you have your business kind of scaled to a point to sustain the workload that's on hand. And when things slow down, that's when those customers are going to come back to you, and that's when that architect's going to refer you, and that's when it becomes really important. Not now, like, you don't need the workload now, but when things slow down and the architect's like, "You know what, not a lot on my plate right now, but I really need somebody I know that I can trust with this," that's when it's gonna be really important.
Yeah.
I'm looking outside my window right now, and the 2 neighbors and my kids are all in the back of my pickup truck, like, drawing stuff, and the kid's swinging a bungee cord right now.
Oh, drawing? What do you mean drawing?
They just have, like, markers and pens, and they're drawing stuff.
On your truck?
No, they have, like, paper.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure, I'm watching them, and then they're also, like, on the top of my boxes is all, the, bed liner, so it's not like they could do
Gotcha.
anything anyway.
Well, that bungee cord, I don't like the sound of that bungee cord, though.
No, that's why I just, like, stopped because he had the bungee cord and hung it over the side of my truck, and I'm like, "Yeah, don't pull that back up." But I think it's
Uh,
it's the one boy, obviously. The rest of,
yeah,
like, all
right.
the girls are up there drawing. I can see just, like, pink crayons and paper, and then he's, like, jumping all over the back of my truck.
Boys is so, like, having both, like, they're so different.
I know.
And seeing, we always thought, like, it's just constant touching.
I know.
It's like they're constantly wrestling and pushing and hitting each other, and I only have 1, so it's like it's usually when we go to a birthday party and, you know, the girls are off doing their one thing and then, like and, they're playing and they might be rough, but it's not, like, constant, like,
Yeah.
just poke, 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 wrestle, wrestle, wrestle.
Yeah, like running around, jumping on the couch,
Yeah.
like just bouncing off the walls.
Yeah.
I guess I'm one of 5 and there were 4 boys and 1 girl.
Same.
So it
Did we
was
ever talk about that?
I don't know, but
W
it was pretty insane growing up. And my mom used to say, like, "Boys, they kick and they spit, but what you see is what you get." So it's like the headaches that you have with boys are exactly what's happening. Like, it's
Right.
the holes in the wall, it's the scratched floor, it's the broken, it's the punching, the hitting, and kicking. But then with the girls, the headaches are, like, deeply
Like
rooted
like,
and
super emotional.
yeah. And she's like, "I would take the 4 boys over the 1 girl any
That's funny.
day." And I'm like, "Oh, boy, I got
Where's the
2."
girl in the
So
relationship?
I have an older brother who's 39, I have a sister who's 38, then I'm
Gotcha.
36, and my 2 younger brothers are 33. They're twins.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I have an older brother, from half brother, me, 2 and then 2 younger brothers, and the youngest is my sister.
Oh, I feel like that might be better. I don't know.
I feel like I mean, if you ask my 2 younger siblings, they would say that she was just treated like a princess.
Yeah, I mean, my younger brothers were too. My parents were
Yeah.
super hard on the 3 older kids, and then they thought that the twins would just kind of follow the lead, and they did not.
Mm,
And I think at that point, my parents were kind of burnt, and then they got divorced. I think that my brothers were definitely still in middle school, so at that
mm,
point, it was like there were no rules.
yeah.
And for about 10 years, they had some fun.
Yeah, that was my parents got divorced when I turned 18 or started the 8-year-long divorce when I turned 18.
Yeah.
And it was just, so I was 18, my brother was 16, 14, and 12.
Yeah, I think I was, like, 16.
So it's like, 16, 14, 12. Like 14, 12 is like that's so important.
Mhm.
And, it's just it's tough. Megan and I taught like, we have 3 now, girl, boy, girl. And it's like the other day, Indy, our youngest, turned 1, and I was like, I was like, I it's gonna be weird not having a baby.
Yeah.
Like, she's 1 now, and it's like, do we have another kid? And then we're driving somewhere, and it took 20 minutes to get in the kids in the car. They're all in car seats. We have 3 car seats across the middle row, and we brought the 2 dogs, and the dogs are, like, behind our seats, and we have the Volvo.
Yeah.
And I pull out of the like, we're street parked. I pull out. I'm like, "I think 3 is good."
Dude, I say that all the time. Like, I thought I wanted 3 kids, we had 1, and I was like, "I could have 1 kid." Like, Selby was a super tough baby, and we have 2 now, and, like, we love having 2, but it's so overwhelming, everything. Like,
Yeah.
brushing teeth, getting a bath, and I'm like, 1 more would just be so much harder.
And
But
Indy is a maniac.
yeah.
Like, launches herself off stuff, like, just like, does not stop moving. And but you know what it is I think that we're comfortable with it.
Yeah.
It's like we're comfortable with the 2. And, and we realize that, like, if we had 4, yeah, of course, we'd be fine.
Yeah, I mean, you
And
make
it's
it work.
yeah, and everyone, I had a client that I think he had 5 or 6 girls, and he was like, "Dude, if I could have more, I would have had more." And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Because they're, high school and college. This is like, where do they all come? They all come back to my house."
Yeah.
Like, and that's when it's like when there's family dinner and there's 6 of them, like, that's when it really, you know, shows the worth that 1 to 5 years old, like what we have now, it's like, yeah, everything is overwhelming, everything is a chore, everything is, you know, hyperactive, and it just, the 3 and the 5-year-old just we'll put them to bed at 7:30, and they come downstairs 11 times.
Yeah, man.
You know, it's like then it's 10 o'clock, and then it's like, dude,
That's our
like
biggest issue right now is by the time they get in bed and stay in bed, it's 10 o'clock,
right.
and we're like, so we have 0 time to ourselves. It's
Yeah.
like, "Work, deal with you freaking monsters, maniac terrorists, and then, like, lay in bed with you, and then maybe I have time to get showered and then get in bed," and it's like, it's tough. We're out, like, Tilly's 5 now.
Mm,
So we're out of the car seats. She's in a booster. Selby's
yep,
8, 8.5. So we're like past the baby point where
right,
going back to baby now would be like, oh, you just started all over again.
right.
We were in the clear.
And now, like, now they're doing the thing where, like, they go to bed at they finally fall asleep at 10, and then 3 in the morning, they're coming in our room.
Two darts still do.
And it's like I said to Meg yesterday, I'm like, "Meg, I don't ever remember getting out of my bed, like, constantly before I fell asleep." She goes, "Do you remember what you did in, kindergarten?" And I was like, "No." She goes, "Exactly."
Dude,
She
if
goes,
I
"They're
got
not even in she's not even they're not even in kindergarten. They're not g like, of course they're not gonna remember this. They're not gonna remember the first house they lived in."
yeah, my parents,
And I'm like, "Oh, yeah,
it was
that's
a
weird."
hard rule that once you're in bed for the night, you did not come out.
Yeah.
Um, and there
And they
was
come
a
downstairs and they do the thing where they don't look at you and, like, they cover their
yeah,
mouth like, "I'm scared." I'm like, "Of what?"
yeah.
I'm just scared." I'm like, "Well, there's nothing to be scared of." "Well, I'm scared." And it's like, "Alright, who taught you that saying I'm scared is, like, this is the way you get out of bed?"
Yeah, my parents were just way more strict and way more lenient. Like we didn't get out of bed, we didn't get into my parents' bed. There was 5 of us too, so they had to be. But it's
Yeah,
still every night. Sometimes like one will wake up and then they'll go wake the other one up to come
right.
into our room. And I'm like, "No.
Mhm.
Why?" The other day Subby said like our bed. I was like, "That's not our bed. That's my bed.
Oh,
Like
it's not
your
it's
bed is over there."
they're like they don't even they call it, mom's bed.
Yeah.
Like, "We're gonna sleep in mom's bed." I'm like, "That's our
Yeah, that's
I
my
mean, my
room.
bed."
Yeah.
And they're like, "No, it's not."
Yeah,
I'm like,
you
what
have
are you
your own
talking
room
about?"
and your own bed.
Yeah, but
I have, it's not usually an argument, but it does come up, and she, it's the whole they're not gonna wanna do this forever, and at some point, we're gonna want them to come
I
crawl into
know.
bed with us, and I, like, concede to that, and then the next night, I'm annoyed again.
Yeah, it's tough, like, I'm right there with you where, like, even when they ask for something ridiculous, like, Meg's constantly like, "Why? Like, just choose your battles."
Yeah,
And it's like, I go back and forth where it's like, "Yeah, why do I care?" And then other times I'm like, "I care because I don't want them to be an asshole."
exactly.
Where it's like, be like, do I don't wanna give them candy at 8 o'clock at night or a popsicle. And then Meg's like, "There's no sugar in it." I'm like, and then I'm reading the box, I'm like, "There's 9 grams of sugar." She goes, "Nick, enough." She's like, "They're not gonna go to sleep regardless if they have this popsicle. They ate all their dinner, like, just give it to them." And it's the same thing, it's like, yeah, I don't wanna be the reason, like, the monster. I don't wanna be the one that always says no.
Yeah, it's tough because I mean, I definitely see differences in my kids and how far they push, and what they get away with, and like the disrespect that they have, and it's not like a cynical disrespect, but even just as far as talking back, where I'm like, if I would have done that to my parents, I would have had a backhand across my face with my mom's rings, like before I even finished saying what I did. And it's different times. I was very afraid of my parents growing up, which I don't have any issues with at this point, past being a kid where I just realized what I needed to do and what I needed to say or not say.
Mhm.
I think it set me up to be as good of a person as I could be in life, but I can't parent that way, unfortunately. So my kids do whatever the fuck they want. It's like, "Whatever, you can talk back to me a million times, and I'll threaten put soap in your mouth, and then don't ever have the heart to do it, and you know it, and tell me that."
Yeah, I know. It's like I always use I'm like, "You're not watching TV tomorrow."
Yeah, and then it's just easier to have them watch
And they're
TV.
yeah, they're like, "Uh, Mom, can I watch TV?"
Yeah. Or it's like, I need to take a poop, go watch TV. I thought you said we
Right.
couldn't watch TV. Just shut up and go watch TV."
Oh, man.
Mm, well, hope everyone enjoyed the kids conversation.
Yeah. If you're thinking of having kids, have plenty.
Yeah.
Let's see if we got any new reviews this we do have, we have a couple new reviews here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It must have been Tyler. I look forward to listening to this podcast every Monday morning. I'm 20 years old, project manager for a custom home builder in Florida, Panhandle. Currently studying to take my Florida general contractor's exam. Not a day goes by where I don't learn something in the field, and the same goes to listening to the Modern Craftsman podcast. The insight and knowledge these guys share with their weekly guests is unmatched on any level. Truly a great listen. Thanks. Thank you to the Modern Craftsman. Keep them coming.
What did you say, 28 or 20?
28.
28. Good age. 20 would be too young
It would be too young?
to start getting his license, I feel like.
Oh. You know, funny story, I actually signed up to take my license when I was 16,
Really?
and I got through, like, the application process, and, they called me, and they were like, "Hey, you need to be 18." And I was like, "Oh, damn."
So close.
I was like, "I
Can my
have all the
parents sign for me?
Yeah, I was like, "I have literally all the credentials. I've worked for a company long enough. I'm in school, but I'm not 18 years old." So then I think I didn't get it until I was like 22 or something. But no, you guys check out or head over to iTunes, drop us a review. Maybe we'll read them. If you guys want to give us some constructive feedback, hit us up on Instagram. We are taking a little bit of a different approach to Instagram. We're going to share some more content on there, and making sure that we pull out some of these clips. We're even talking about possibly putting up more video. So, oh, that's actually what I wanted to bring up. All of the reasons why people listen to us. So I'm going to read another one because it's just been a constant flood of people reaching out. But Noah Durham writes, my answer to what do you guys want to hear? Oh,
That's not the same
that is
question.
not the same question. I pulled up the wrong. You know what? Noah,
Let's
I
hear
might
it
as well read it
anyway.
now. What do you guys want to hear more of? I want to hear more about project management. I'm 25 years old and I've been working as a project manager for a leading home builder in Asheville, North Carolina for 10 months. I would love to hear your take on expectations, experience, and how many homes that someone or a project manager should oversee and the day-to-day tasks for your
We're gonna
PMs.
have John Marley back on.
I think so. Let me I had one queued up and I totally botched that. So, oh my gosh. Here we go.
I'm gonna text
Build
John
Mac
now.
Andy. I listen to the podcast because you guys and the people you bring in are the only people I know that are passionate enough about their work and I can relate to so many things, I think. I read that wrong. I can relate to so many things. Hearing you guys say you think about quitting and shutting down the business at least once a week made me feel like I wasn't crazy and I wasn't alone. That gave me a lot of fuel to keep moving forward. This podcast has kept me in good spirits and leveled me to keep putting better and better work out. So that's why we started it. We don't, I think we side text each other all the time like, How you doing? How you doing? Today I feel like giving up." Well, go to sleep, wake up, you'll be fine tomorrow."
Today sucked.
Yeah.
Nah, today was fine. Yesterday was a pain in the ass.
Yesterday, like, hey, this going back to the kids as we wrap up this podcast here. I stayed back and helped the kids off to school yesterday, which I don't always get to do, but it worked out with my schedule. And what the hell did my son say? He said something basically to the tune of like, "No, I don't love you, dad. Like I love mom,"
Yeah, I get that all the time.
or something along that lines. And for whatever reason, it just put me in a mood all day.
Really?
Yeah, and
I
I
get
got home and I
that
walked
all
in, I
the
looked at him,
time.
I'm like, "That little shit." I'm
Did I tell
like,
you what Tilly did the other day? I feel like I
"No."
told you this. I told a bunch of people. So I was sitting on the couch. I think it was Thursday or Friday night of last week, and I had the hiccups. and we, like Rachel tells him if you get scared, they, like, go away.
Mm.
So the one time she was at the dinner table, she had the hiccups, and I snuck out of the kitchen, went outside, and, like, our table's in a bay window, and I went behind the bushes, jumped up and slammed on, like, on the glass and screamed, and she started crying. I scared her so badly, but it got rid of her hiccups. So, like, now when anyone has a hiccup, she tries to scare them. So I was laying on the couch, she said, "Oh, you have the hiccups. Close your eyes. I'm gonna scare you." And I was like, "Okay." So I closed my eyes, and she climbs on the other end of the couch, sits on my head, and then farts, and then turns around and goes, "Do you still have them?"
Did you?
No, I did. I was
Oh,
like, "Yeah, it didn't work, but thanks. That was not
yeah.
scary. That was just gross."
Yeah, yeah, I have pink eye, but that's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see you guys next week. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Duration Molding and Millwork. If you want to find out more about Duration Molding and Millwork, head over to durationmillwork.com. The next generation of exterior millwork for premium performance. You guys know what it's all about, but it's the Boral True Exterior Siding and Trim made into a bunch of stock molding profiles, also custom profiles, and of course, the beveled siding stock profiles.
Yeah, and
See you guys next.
if you hadn't sorry, if you had not or have not listened to last week's episode, we had Art from Duration on, so give last week's episode a listen.
Yeah, episode 200.
No, not 200.
Episode 201
Two
was that last week. Sorry, Art. He was 201. We'll see you guys next week.